Welcome, everybody. This is John Simonson, Wild Rivers Trout Unlimited chapter. And today we got Max Wolter, the DNR Senior Fishery Biologist for Sawyer County. We're talking about the putting the woody in the Namekagon River, the Upper Namekagon. So, Max, please go ahead and tell us all about it.
Yeah, thanks, John. This is a cool project, and a lot of agencies and groups came together to make this happen. So I want to give a shout out to everybody right at the start. I work with Wisconsin DNR. We kind of coordinated this program, but we worked very closely with our partners, the National Park Service. You'll see kind of how they come into the picture. We had some great help from the U.S. Forest Service and Wisconsin Trout Unlimited, the Wild Rivers chapter. And I think that's how it should be with a project like this, because you have a lot of people that care about the river, a lot of great stewards, and we all came together for this interesting project, um, looking at getting more woody habitat available for trout in some specific spots on the Namekagon River. So that's what we're going to talk about. So a little history here on the Namekagon River and wood. There was a very interesting research project, I guess almost 20 years ago now, where they looked historically at how much wood was in the river. And this was done, you can read the paper, it was in 2009. And the conclusion was there used to be 3 to 5 times more woody habitat than what we have today. And the changes are due to logging practices, kind of how the river's used now for recreational reasons, and kind of how wood recruits the river naturally. So a lot less of that woody habitat available. And of course, this is a really important habitat type for trout and for other fish. So this is something that's been on our radar for a while as a thing we'd like to address. So in 2022, my team did kind of an updated inventory of all the wood that's in the cold water reach of the Namekagon River, and that's kind of our focus. So I'll show you some maps in a moment. But what we did is we basically paddled slowly along the river with clipboards and GPSs, and we categorized every single piece of wood that was in the water that kind of met these minimum criteria. We weren't doing every single little stick and twig, but if it was at least 3.5 feet long and 4 inches in diameter, it counted. And so we categorized things by size. We categorized them by how deep they were, or how much of it was in the water, and then whether it had branching or not, because that can be important for kind of its ability to provide habitat for fish. So we went through, we did all that, came up with maps that show where all the wood is in the Namekagon River. And this is kind of done by reach, and you can see it's color coded. And what you notice right away is there is quite a bit of variation. And we can look at this a whole bunch of different ways, but I just showed two here. The map on the left is just all wood, all pieces of wood, all sizes, all branching, whatever. You can see that wood is not super abundant in the upper reach when we're looking at like County Highway M in Bayfield County down to, I believe that's Leonard School Road. You know, those are lighter colors. And then you get into that middle reach, and we do have more wood there. But still, what we found is this is much lower than those historic levels that they identified. Um, and certain types of wood, especially if we're talking about like deep wood that would be available to big trout, are quite rare. So you can see kind of the change in kind of the scale there. There's some reaches where we're finding none or maybe one piece of deep wood for every mile of river. So this is still a very limited habitat type, but this exercise also gave us the opportunity to figure out where we would want to target wood additions. If we were going to be putting trees into the Namekagon River, where would they be most useful? So as we were going along and doing this, we identified 9 sites that we wanted to add some wood to. And this was based on, again, where that wood was limited, proximity to cold water. So some of the good cold water tributaries, or where we had good spring seeps, places we know trout want to be, places where we can get the wood into some depth. You know, we're not looking to put a tree onto a shallow riffle. We want to get it into a nice deep run or a nice deep pool. And then, of course, the last thing, and maybe the most important thing, is feasibility. And you'll understand more about why that's important in a moment. So we identified these 9 sites. We ended up having to cross a couple of them out, at least for this first stage of the project. We may return and try to do these. But that kind of boiled down to a slightly smaller and more manageable list for our first year. The other thing we did is we wanted to understand the impact that this was going to have. So we did electrofishing surveys before the wood was added and a year after the wood was added. We were able to do that on 5 of these sites. And then we had 4 control sites we can compare to as well. We're looking at adult and young of year, which is just a little baby trout that were born within that year. We're looking at their abundance, and then we just got a count of all the other species. So how many other different species are using these sites? We'll come back to that electrofishing stuff in a moment. So this is a map of our tree addition sites. The red squares are the ones that we didn't pursue this year, but the others are places where we added wood. So you can see we have a nice spread all the way up and down the river, from Cap Creek down to the mouth of Mosquito Brook. So here is a little bit about how we got these trees in the river. So we had an interesting process here. The Namekagon has important and really wonderful designation as a wild and scenic river. And because of that designation, our partners at the Park Service said, we really don't want to be taking a bunch of trees right off the riverbank. And that's understandable, because hopefully those will be trees that will, at the end of their long life of providing habitat to terrestrial animals, some of those will die and fall in the water and then become fish habitat. So that's fine. But we had to come up with another source for trees. So what we did is we went tree shopping. We worked with some of our partners in nearby county forests, Sawyer and Bayfield counties, and basically could go out and find the exact trees that we needed for each of these sites. It was a little more work, but we made sure that we had the height, the diameter, and even the species of tree that was going to be a perfect match for each of these. So we kind of were putting in an order, and then we got our delivery of our trees on a flatbed trailer. Then we had to get them in the river, and this is a bit of an adventure, so I'll start playing this video here. I'm gonna kill the volume so I can keep talking. Um, so sometimes we were able to just get the tree in right off a bridge, which was nice. Sometimes we were bringing them down canoe landings. This one wants to go, and then it gets hung up a little bit. Here comes Logan to the rescue. Most of these went more smoothly, but John from Wild Rivers filled this one for us, and it happened to be the one where it kind of is a little bit of a clown show, but you'll see the tree end up in the water here in a moment. One more little branch to catch for me. There we go. And now we have a team of minions in the water, and they all kind of descend on the tree and grab it. And this is where we benefited from some of that partnership stuff. The Forest Service lent us a crew of young people with good, strong backs and knees, because moving these was not super easy. If we were going downstream, obviously that was easier. We did a couple that we had to move upstream, and that was a lot of work. But we walked these into position. I'll show you more about that in a second. We'll go to the next slide. So what we end up doing is we place these just like a tree that had fallen. So we get the kind of the base end up on or very close to the bank, so that all the branching extends out into the deeper water where the fish can use it. In some cases, we cabled these temporarily because we wanted to make sure that they, you know, kind of got established and embedded in that area, and didn't get washed away by any high flow events. And then after about a year, we felt pretty confident that they weren't going to go anywhere, and so we were able to remove those cables. A couple holes were quite deep. This is one where we did not do an electrofishing survey. You'll be able to see why. We're swimming to get that tree into position, but this is an awesome place to have some deep wood, and we expect that that particular tree is going to be holding a lot of trout, including some of the biggest ones in the river. And this is what a site kind of ends up looking like. So you can see the trees kind of spaced out here, a little gap between, with the tops extending out into the thalweg, which is the term we have for kind of the deepest part of the run of the river, where trout are going to be able to hang out underneath the ends of these trees and still be feeding on things that are going by. So this is the design we were hoping for. So let's talk a little bit about what we found when we evaluated the use of these trees. And so you're going to see some of our electrofishing survey data. These are images from some of the surveys we do on the Namekagon. We really enjoy spending time out on the river. We always see a lot of nice trout, like that bottom photo, a lot of other species out there. It is kind of a warm water transition river, which I've talked about in past TU web videos here. We also brought the staff from the American Birkebeiner out for one of our surveys so they could see kind of what's going on with the river and have some conversations with them about the importance of groundwater and snow and all that stuff. All right, so here's some results. So what you're going to see here is tables that show both the control sites, which that's the top line there, and the treatment sites, and then we have before and after electrofishing catch rates. And then that final column might be the easiest one to focus on because that's the percent of change. And so we're going to start with brown trout here. And if we're looking at adults, We saw a slight increase, but we saw that at both the control and the treatment sites. So we didn't see a huge change, at least as far as, our catch rate for brown trout. Now, when you add this habitat, you might also be changing how easy it is to electrofish these sites. So that could be a factor too. So it is possible there's more adult brown trout, and I think we'd probably suspect there are, but it's not necessarily going to show up easily in these surveys unless you're seeing really big increases. But either way, we feel pretty confident that we're adding some habitat that the trout are liking. They're spending time there. That's good. Now, if you see this big red negative for the young of your trout, don't be concerned. We did not do anything that changed trout reproduction in a negative way. What we saw was a pretty actually had a little bit less of a decrease, but we absolutely expected there was going to be a decrease from the before year to the after year. And here's why. When we look at reproduction in the Namekagon River from year to year, 2024 was an all-time record as far as the number of young of year trout that we were catching, and this was across some other sites. So when you have a peak like that and an all-time high, you almost you know that it's going to come down the following year, and it did. It came down by about 60%, which is very similar to the change that we saw at those wood addition sites. So nothing concerning there. This is just kind of the natural peaks and valleys that you get related to conditions when they're spawning and survival of eggs and frying, things like that. And 2025, even though it's lower than 2024 by quite a bit, still a pretty strong year when you look at things historically. So no concerns there. The bigger story when it comes to this wood addition stuff is what we saw with brook trout. So here's that same kind of table with control and treatment before and after. Our control sites are not sites where we capture brook trout, at least in the summer months on the Namekagon River. They're a little bit too warm. So there's brown trout there, but no brook trout. And we didn't see any change to that. And remember, the control sites are ones where there was no wood added. The treatment sites were a very different story, though. There was one treatment site where we had brook trout before, and after wood addition, not only did we see a lot more trout at that site, we had another site where we had not seen brook trout previously, and we did capture one or two. I think it was just one. So that those two things ended up being a huge change in our capture rate for brook trout. They really responded positively to the wood, especially at one site. And I'm going to take you underwater at that site right now so you can see. Oh, and the video is a little choppy sometimes, but once we get under the water, you'll be able to see kind of what we're dealing with. So here we are, and we're going to take you kind of right to and underneath one of these trees that we added. And now you're going to start seeing not just a couple trout, you're going to start seeing a ton of trout. And you see that shadow on the ground or on the stream bed. That's the tree. And you can just see all these trout are loving that tree. They're all jammed up underneath there, including some really nice brookies up to almost 15 inches. So the brook trout are really responding positively to this particular project, especially at some of these sites. And that's not, a total coincidence. We selected these sites because we knew they were ones that brook trout might like. Here's kind of another way of looking at that. This is our brook trout catch rate at one of these sites. You can see it jumps around a lot. And then after we added those trees in 2024, 2025, all-time high as far as the number of trout we're seeing. So our conclusions about this project is first, we were able to do this, which was a win. This was a partnership win where we had different agencies, sometimes with different philosophies about how to, manage the river. And what we did is we came together and found something that worked well for everybody. We were able to bring those trees in, put them in some really key areas, and the fish are using them. We didn't see any major changes for brown trout, although these are still great places to go fish and target brown trout. We also didn't see any changes in species occurrence. I didn't mention that earlier, but there wasn't a whole lot of a story there. Species were still using the sites at about the same rate. The brook trout response was kind of the real shocker. Or maybe it's not too much of a surprise, but that's kind of the take-home message is that when you put these trees in places that have nice cold water for brook trout, boy, they really find them and use them. So our recommendation is that we're going to keep working on these. We're going to try to make sure that we keep wood in at these sites. That may mean having to add more trees in the future, and we want to find other places that we can do this along the river. Um, we did have some issues where we had some beavers that really enjoyed this project as well, and they started chewing up our trees. It's like, hey, leave those alone. Those are there for the trout. So we may have to go in and add some more trees in the future if we want to make sure that this habitat's still available for our awesome Namekagon River trout. So this is my email address if anybody has any questions. And I'll let one more video roll while John's signing us off here. You can see some more of the trout. This is the same site, but just another view of everybody scooting around down there.
Max, this is awesome. Thank you.
Well,
That's
thank you guys for
amazing.
being
All the
involved.
work. Yeah,
Yeah,
it was
yeah,
great. It was a
yeah.
lot of fun 2 days.
And it
If
was
I
a good way
remember
to
right,
spend some, yeah,
if
go
I
ahead.
remember right, I took a dunk.
But it was August, so it was okay. It
Yes,
felt
it
pretty
was.
good.
I
Yeah.
think I think you were in shorts and sandals.
That's right. Yep, yep. Just embracing the stream.
Yeah, you bet.
But look at
Well,
all those trout. Isn't that just nice to see?
yeah, it is. It's awesome.
Yeah. So
Very good. Thank you.
you bet. Thanks for having me. Thanks for doing all these web videos. They're awesome.
Thank you.